Marcus Chen had always found peace by the lake. The crystalline waters of Lake Serenity stretched endlessly before him, its surface reflecting the twin moons of Kepler 442b like scattered diamonds. 3 years ago, when the first wave of human colonists arrived on this world, he never imagined he'd be sitting here on a quiet evening, watching alien wildlife drink from shores that now felt like home. The colony of New Haven had grown from a desperate collection of prefab shelters into a thriving settlement of nearly 10,000 souls. Marcus worked as a geological surveyor, mapping mineral deposits and underground water sources for the expanding community. It was honest work that kept him outdoors, away from the political tensions that seemed to follow humanity wherever they went in the galaxy. Tonight was different, though. The usual evening calm was broken by frantic splashing from the deeper waters near the lake's center. Marcus squinted through the fading daylight, his enhanced vision implants automatically adjusting to the dimmer conditions. What he saw made his blood run cold. A creature was drowning. At first glance, it looked like some kind of large feline, its spotted coat gleaming wetly as it struggled against the water. But as Marcus watched, he realized this was no Earth animal. The creature was massive, easily the size of a tiger, with an elongated snout filled with sharp teeth and 4 powerful limbs that ended in webbed paws. Most striking were its eyes, large and intelligent, burning with a golden fire that spoke of sapience. Without hesitation, Marcus kicked off his boots and dove into the lake. The water was shockingly cold, but his body's genetic modifications helped him adapt quickly. He'd been enhanced for colonial life, his lungs able to process the slightly different atmosphere, and his muscles strengthened for the higher gravity. Right now, those enhancements were the difference between life and death for both him and the drowning alien. The creature, which Marcus now recognized as one of the native Zalathi, was tangled in what looked like synthetic netting. The Zalathi were known to the colonists, though contact had been minimal. They were one of several intelligent species native to Kepler 442b, and while not technologically advanced, they possessed a complex social structure and had been observed using simple tools. As Marcus swam closer, the Zalathi's struggles became more desperate. It was clearly exhausted, its golden eyes wide with panic. The netting had wrapped around its rear legs and was weighing it down, preventing it from reaching the surface to breathe. Marcus could see cuts where the creature had tried to bite through the material, but the synthetic fibers were too strong. "Easy, easy," Marcus said softly, though he doubted the creature understood human speech. He approached slowly, hands visible, trying to project calm despite the urgency of the situation. The Zalathi's eyes locked onto his, and for a moment, Marcus felt a shock of recognition pass between them. This wasn't just an animal in distress. This was a person, a thinking being who understood exactly how dire their situation had become. Marcus pulled a utility knife from his belt, grateful for his habit of keeping tools close at hand even during his evening walks. The blade was designed to cut through various materials, and he prayed it would be strong enough for the netting. The Zalathi watched him approach, its struggles slowing as exhaustion took hold. Working underwater while keeping both himself and the Zalathi afloat proved more challenging than Marcus had anticipated. The creature was heavy, its dense muscle and bone structure making it difficult to support. But every time Marcus felt his strength flagging, he looked into those intelligent golden eyes and found renewed determination. The first strand of netting parted under his blade, then another. The Zalathi seemed to understand what was happening and tried to hold still, though its body's natural panic responses made complete stillness impossible. Marcus worked methodically, cutting through the tangled web of synthetic fibers while fighting against the lake's gentle current. Finally, the last strand gave way. The Zalathi's legs were free, and it immediately began swimming upward with powerful strokes. Marcus followed, his lungs burning as they broke the surface together. Both of them gasped for air, the aliens breathing rapid and shallow from exhaustion and fear. For several minutes, they simply floated together, recovering their strength. Marcus stayed close, ready to help if the creature showed signs of distress, but the Zalathi seemed to be a natural swimmer once freed from the netting. Its webbed paws and streamlined body were clearly evolved for aquatic life. As they swam toward shore, Marcus couldn't help but study the creature more closely. The Zalathi's coat was a beautiful pattern of rosettes and spots, golden brown with black markings that seemed to shimmer in the moonlight. Its build suggested power and grace, with long limbs and a flexible spine that allowed it to move through the water with fluid efficiency. When they reached the shallows, the Zalathi struggled to stand on the rocky bottom. Marcus could see that it was favoring one leg, likely injured during its fight with the netting. Without thinking, he moved to support the creature, slipping an arm around its midsection and helping it toward dry land. The Zalathi accepted his help without resistance, though Marcus could feel the tension in its muscles. It was clearly wary but seemed to understand that he meant no harm. They made slow progress up the gentle slope of the lake shore, water streaming from both their bodies. Once they were safely on dry ground, Marcus stepped back to give the creature space. The Zalathi shook itself vigorously, sending droplets flying in all directions. Then it turned to face him, and Marcus found himself the subject of an intense, intelligent gaze. For a long moment, they simply looked at each other. Marcus had always believed that intelligence was recognizable across species lines, and now he was certain of it. There was wisdom in those golden eyes, along with something that might have been gratitude. The Zalathi made a sound somewhere between a purr and a low growl, and Marcus chose to interpret it as a thank you. But as the creature prepared to leave, something made Marcus look more carefully at its behavior. The Zalathi kept glancing back toward the lake, its ears swiveling as if listening for something. It took a few steps away from the shore, then turned back, making that purring growl again. Its body language spoke of agitation, of urgent need to be elsewhere. Marcus followed the creature's gaze back to the water. At first, he saw nothing unusual. The lake's surface had returned to its normal calm, reflecting the twin moons and the scattered stars of the alien sky. But then, just at the edge of his enhanced vision, he caught a glimpse of movement near the spot where he'd found the drowning Zalathi. The creature beside him made a more urgent sound, almost pleading in its tone. It took several steps toward the water, then back toward Marcus, clearly torn between leaving and staying. Its behavior reminded him of a dog trying to lead someone to an important discovery. Marcus walked to the water's edge, his enhanced vision scanning the surface for whatever had captured the Zalathi's attention. The creature followed him, its limp more pronounced now that adrenaline was wearing off. It stopped beside him and made a series of soft calls toward the water, sounds that carried a note of desperate longing. That's when Marcus saw it, a small movement in the reeds near the shore, barely visible in the moonlight. At first, he thought it might be a fish or some other aquatic life, but as he watched, he realized the movement was too purposeful, too coordinated to be random. The Zalathi called out again, and this time Marcus heard an answer, a small, plaintive sound that made his heart clench with sudden understanding. Without hesitation, he waded back into the lake, following the sound to its source. Hidden among the tall reeds, he found what the Zalathi had been protecting, a kit, barely larger than a house cat, clinging to a floating piece of debris. The baby Zalathi was clearly exhausted, its tiny paws barely able to maintain their grip on the makeshift raft. Its coat was the same golden brown as the adult, but softer, fluffier, marking it as very young. Marcus approached slowly, speaking in soft, reassuring tones. The kit watched him with wide eyes that held the same intelligence as its parent, but also the vulnerability of extreme youth. When Marcus gently scooped it up, the little creature didn't resist, too tired to do anything but curl against his chest. As he waded back to shore with the kit, Marcus understood why the adult Zalathi had been so frantic. This wasn't just about its own survival, it was about protecting its child. The netting must have trapped them both, and in the chaos, the kit had been swept away toward the reeds while the adult became entangled. On shore, the reunion was immediate and touching. The adult Zalathi rushed to its offspring, nuzzling and licking the kit while making soft, comforting sounds. The baby responded with tiny mews and purrs, pressing close to its parent's warmth. Marcus watched from a respectful distance, moved by the obvious bond between parent and child. Family love, it seemed, was truly universal. But as he prepared to leave them to their reunion, the adult Zalathi did something unexpected. It approached him slowly, the kit following on unsteady legs. When the creature was close enough, it gently butted its head against Marcus's hand. The same gesture a cat might use to show affection. The kit, emboldened by its parent's actions, came forward and sniffed curiously at Marcus's fingers. For several minutes, the three of them shared a moment of peaceful connection. Marcus marveled at how quickly trust had been established between species that had barely had contact before tonight. But trust, he realized, was often born from actions rather than words. Eventually, the adult Zalathi stepped back and made a sound that Marcus interpreted as farewell. It turned to lead its kit away from the lake, moving carefully to accommodate its injury and the young one's shorter legs. Marcus watched them go, feeling oddly honored to have been part of their story. As they reached the edge of the forest that bordered the lake, the adult Zalathi turned back one last time. It made a sound, deeper and more complex than before, and Marcus had the strange feeling that he was being given information of some kind. The creature's posture suggested importance, urgency even, as if it were trying to communicate something vital. But without a translation device or any knowledge of Zalathi communication, Marcus could only watch as they disappeared into the trees. He stood alone on the shore, water still dripping from his clothes, wondering what the creature had been trying to tell him. The encounter left him with more questions than answers. How had the Zalathi ended up trapped in synthetic netting? The material looked human-made, possibly from one of the colony's fishing operations or water collection systems. But the lake was supposed to be off-limits to major industrial activity. Part of the environmental protection agreements the colonists had made with the Planetary Council. More troubling was the location where he'd found them. That part of the lake was deeper and more isolated, not somewhere a parent would normally take a young kit for swimming lessons. It suggested they might have been fleeing from something, or perhaps investigating something that had put them in danger. Marcus made his way back to his camp, his mind churning with possibilities. Tomorrow, he would have to file a report with Colonial Administration about the encounter. First contact protocols required documentation of any significant interaction with native species, especially one that involved potential human-caused harm. But something told him this incident was about more than a chance encounter with wildlife. The adult Zalathi's behavior at the end, that sense of urgency and attempt to communicate, suggested there was more to the story, and the presence of human-made netting in a protected area raised questions about what else might be happening around Lake Serenity. As he built up his campfire and prepared for the night, Marcus found himself watching the tree line where the Zalathi had disappeared. He had the unsettling feeling that this encounter was only the beginning of something much larger and more complex than a simple rescue operation. The universe, in his experience, rarely dealt in coincidences. Marcus couldn't shake the memory of the Zalathi's urgent communication attempt. 3 days had passed since the rescue, and he found himself returning to Lake Serenity each evening, hoping for another encounter. His official report had been filed with Colonial Administration, noting the presence of synthetic netting and recommending an investigation into possible unauthorized fishing operations. The response had been typically bureaucratic. A form letter acknowledging receipt of his report and assuring him that appropriate departments would look into the matter. Marcus knew from experience that appropriate departments often meant the report would disappear into a digital filing system and never be seen again unless it became politically convenient. Tonight felt different, though. As Marcus approached his usual observation spot, he noticed something that made him freeze mid-step. There were tracks in the soft earth near the water's edge, not human tracks, but the distinctive four-toed paw prints of Zelathi. They were recent, probably from earlier that day. Following the tracks, Marcus discovered they led to a small grove of trees about 50 meters from the shore. The prints were joined by others here, suggesting multiple Zelathi had gathered in this spot. But what caught Marcus's attention wasn't the tracks themselves, but what they surrounded. In the center of the grove lay a collection of objects that clearly didn't belong in the natural landscape. Pieces of synthetic netting, torn and cut, formed a rough circle around what looked like electronic components. Marcus recognized some of the parts: sensor arrays, data storage units, and what might have been communication equipment. All of it appeared to be human technology, but modified in ways he'd never seen before. The equipment had been carefully arranged, almost ceremonially. Each piece was positioned with obvious intent, creating a pattern that suggested meaning beyond random placement. Around the technological artifacts, the Zelathi had placed natural objects, smooth stones, pieces of driftwood, and what looked like carved bone ornaments. Marcus approached the arrangement carefully, his enhanced vision recording everything for later analysis. Some of the human technology showed signs of recent modification, with new components integrated using techniques that seemed far beyond what he knew of Zelathi capabilities. Yet the workmanship was undeniably sophisticated. A soft sound made him look up. At the edge of the grove, barely visible in the shadows, stood the Zelathi he'd rescued 3 days earlier. The creature watched him with those intelligent golden eyes, but its posture wasn't threatening. If anything, it seemed to be waiting for something. "Hello again," Marcus said softly, keeping his voice calm and non-threatening. "Thank you for this." He gestured toward the arranged objects. "I'm not sure what it means, but I can see it's important." The Zelathi stepped forward, moving with obvious care. Its injury from the netting incident was healing, but it still favored one leg slightly. As it approached, Marcus noticed something he'd missed during the rescue. Around the creature's neck was what appeared to be a collar, but unlike any animal collar he'd ever seen. It was made of the same synthetic material as the netting, but worked into an intricate pattern that included what looked like electronic components. The creature stopped a few meters away and made a series of sounds. They were clearly communicative, with patterns and inflections that suggested complex meaning. Marcus wished desperately for a translation device, but the colony's xeno-linguistic resources were limited to the major galactic trade languages. Understanding his limitation, the Zelathi moved to the arranged objects and began manipulating them. With careful movements of its paws, it rearranged several pieces of equipment, creating what looked like a crude but functional communication array. Marcus watched in amazement as the creature's webbed digits proved surprisingly dexterous, capable of fine manipulation despite their aquatic adaptations. When the arrangement was complete, the Zelathi stepped back and looked expectantly at Marcus. The message was clear. The creature wanted him to interact with the device. Marcus approached cautiously, his geological survey training helping him recognize the basic configuration of sensors and transmitters. As he knelt beside the makeshift array, Marcus noticed that some of the human components had been modified with what appeared to be organic elements. Thin, fiber-like structures that looked almost biological were woven between the electronic circuits. The integration was seamless, suggesting a level of biotechnological understanding that went far beyond anything in the colony's databases about Zelathi capabilities. Tentatively, Marcus activated what looked like the main power unit. The array hummed to life, its various components beginning to glow with soft bioluminescent patterns. The organic fibers pulsed with light, creating a complex network of connections between the electronic elements. Suddenly, the device began projecting a three-dimensional holographic display. Marcus stepped back in surprise as the air above the array filled with images and data streams. Most of the information was incomprehensible, displayed in symbols and patterns he didn't recognize. But scattered throughout were elements he could understand: star charts, planetary orbital mechanics, and what looked like population distribution maps. The Zelathi moved to stand beside him, using vocalizations and gestures to direct his attention to specific parts of the display. Marcus began to understand that this wasn't just a communication device, it was a comprehensive data archive. And the information it contained was about the human colony. One display showed New Haven from above, with detailed mapping of infrastructure, population centers, and resource extraction operations. The level of detail was stunning, far beyond what the colonists had achieved in their own mapping efforts. Every building, every piece of equipment, every human activity was cataloged with scientific precision. But more disturbing were the additional data overlays. The holographic display showed environmental impact assessments, ecosystem disruption analyses, and population stress indicators for native species. The picture that emerged was of a planet under siege, its natural systems strained beyond sustainable limits by human presence. Marcus felt a chill as he realized the implications. The Zelathi weren't just intelligent, they were sophisticated observers who had been studying human activities in detail, and what they'd found was deeply troubling. The creature beside him manipulated the display, bringing up new information. This data focused on the lake system where Marcus had found the trapped Zelathi. The holographic maps showed an intricate network of underwater installations that he'd never known existed. Sensor arrays, automated collection systems, and what looked like experimental facilities were scattered throughout the lake bed. Marcus recognized some of the installations from his geological surveys, but others were completely unknown to him. According to the display, these hidden facilities were dumping synthetic materials into the lake ecosystem at an alarming rate. The netting that had nearly killed the Zelathi was just one small piece of a much larger contamination problem. The data showed that the contamination wasn't accidental. The patterns of deployment and the types of materials suggested deliberate testing of some kind. Someone was using the lake as an experimental site, and they weren't concerned about the impact on native life forms. As Marcus absorbed this information, the Zelathi brought up another display that made his blood run cold. Population tracking data for Zelathi families around Lake Serenity showed a dramatic decline over the past 6 months. Birth rates had dropped to nearly zero, adult mortality was increasing, and several family groups had disappeared entirely. The creature gestured toward its own collar-like device, and Marcus suddenly understood. The Zelathi had been monitoring their own population decline and had traced it to the contamination from human installations. The sophisticated biotechnological integration he'd observed wasn't advanced native development. It was an adaptation response, an attempt to use captured human technology to understand and document what was happening to their species. Marcus felt sick as the full picture became clear. The Zelathi he'd rescued hadn't been randomly trapped by fishing nets. It had been deliberately investigating the underwater installations when it encountered some kind of automated defense system. The netting was likely designed to capture and contain any native life that got too close to the secret facilities. The display changed again, showing what appeared to be communication logs between human facilities. Marcus couldn't read the encoded text, but the timestamps and data transfer patterns suggested ongoing coordination between multiple sites. This wasn't the work of a rogue operation. It was an organized effort involving significant resources and planning. The Zalathi moved closer to Marcus and made a series of urgent sounds. Its body language conveyed desperate need for understanding, for help. Marcus looked into those intelligent golden eyes and saw not just intelligence, but pleading. This creature was asking him, as a representative of humanity, to help stop the destruction of its people. Marcus reached out slowly and placed his hand on the creature's head. The Zalathi didn't pull away, instead pressing slightly into the contact. The trust implicit in that gesture hit Marcus harder than any words could have. Despite everything humanity was doing to this planet, this being still believed that individual humans could make a difference. "I understand," Marcus said quietly, "and I'll help. I promise." The Zalathi seemed to understand his tone, if not his words. It moved back to the array and manipulated the controls again. The display changed to show what appeared to be a detailed schematic of one of the underwater facilities. This one was larger than the others, with multiple interconnected structures and what looked like a central command center. Marcus studied the schematic carefully, committing every detail to memory. The facility was located in the deepest part of Lake Serenity, about 3 kilometers from shore. According to the data, it was the central hub for all the other installations, coordinating their activities and collecting their data. The creature brought up additional information about the facility's operational schedule. It showed patterns of activity that suggested the installation was automated for the most part, with periodic visits from human personnel. But there was something else. Recent data indicating increased activity levels and what might have been preparation for a major operation. Marcus felt a growing sense of urgency as he studied the information. Whatever was happening at these facilities, it was escalating. The environmental damage patterns suggested that the current contamination was just a testing phase for something much larger and more destructive. The Zalathi deactivated the display and began carefully disassembling the array. Marcus understood that this meeting was ending, but the creature's actions suggested it expected him to take action based on what he'd learned. As it gathered the technological components, the Zalathi paused and looked directly at Marcus. The creature reached into what appeared to be a pouch integrated into its collar device and withdrew a small object. It offered this to Marcus with obvious significance. The object was a data storage crystal, similar to the ones used in human technology, but modified with the same organic integration he'd seen in the array. Marcus accepted the crystal with reverent care. He understood that he was being entrusted with evidence that could expose the entire operation. The weight of that responsibility settled on his shoulders like a physical burden. The Zalathi gathered the remaining components and prepared to leave. But before it departed, it did something that surprised Marcus. The creature approached and gently pressed its forehead against Marcus's chest, a gesture that felt remarkably like a blessing or benediction. Then it was gone, disappearing into the forest with its technological salvage. Marcus stood alone in the grove, clutching the data crystal and trying to process everything he'd learned. The peaceful evening by the lake had been shattered, replaced by the knowledge that his own species was systematically destroying the very beings they shared this planet with. As Marcus made his way back to his camp, his mind raced with possibilities and plans. He needed to find a way to access the data on the crystal without alerting whoever was behind the lake installations. He needed to understand the full scope of the operation and identify who was responsible. And most importantly, he needed to find a way to stop it before the Zalathi population suffered irreparable damage. The path ahead was dangerous. The level of organization and resources behind the lake facilities suggested this operation had significant backing, possibly at the highest levels of colonial administration. Exposing it would put Marcus in serious personal danger, and there was no guarantee he could trust anyone within the official colonial hierarchy. But as he thought about the trust the Zalathi had placed in him and the desperate hope in those intelligent golden eyes, Marcus knew he had no choice. The universe had presented him with a moral test, and his response would define not just his own character, but potentially the future relationship between humanity and the native species of Kepler 442b. The next phase of this crisis would require careful planning, technical expertise, and allies he could trust absolutely. Marcus began mentally cataloging his resources and contacts, looking for people who might be willing to risk everything to stop an atrocity being committed in humanity's name. The crystal felt warm in his hand, as if it contained not just data, but hope itself. Tomorrow, everything would change. Marcus spent the next 48 hours carefully analyzing the data crystal in his private workshop. What he discovered exceeded his worst fears. The crystal contained not just evidence of environmental contamination, but detailed records of a systematic program designed to drive the Zalathi and other native species to extinction. The program was codenamed Tabula Rasa, and its goals were chillingly simple: eliminate all intelligent native life on Kepler 442b to make way for unrestricted human expansion. The lake installations were just one component of a planet-wide network designed to introduce toxins, disrupt breeding cycles, and destroy the ecological foundations that supported native species. Most shocking of all was the program's authorization. The digital signatures and command structures traced back to Earth Central Command, the highest levels of the human colonial authority. This wasn't a rogue operation. It was official policy, hidden from the colonists who believed they were part of a peaceful settlement effort. Marcus sat back from his analysis workstation, feeling physically sick. Every human on Kepler 442b was unknowingly participating in genocide. The environmental protection agreements, the cultural exchange programs, the careful settlement patterns that avoided native territories, all of it was theater designed to hide the true agenda. But the Zalathi data had revealed something the architects of Tabula Rasa hadn't expected. The native species were far more sophisticated than anyone had realized. They had been secretly monitoring human activities from the beginning, documenting the gradual poisoning of their world with scientific precision that rivaled anything humanity had achieved. More importantly, they had been working together. The crystal contained communication records between dozens of different species across the planet. The natives had formed an underground resistance network, sharing information and coordinating responses to the human threat. The biotechnological integration Marcus had observed wasn't just Zalathi innovation. It was the result of interspecies collaboration on a scale that redefined what intelligence meant. Marcus faced an impossible choice. He could report his findings through official channels and watch them disappear into the same system that had authorized Tabula Rasa. He could flee the planet and try to expose the genocide from a safe distance, knowing that millions of native beings would die while he sought help. Or he could take direct action, knowing it would likely cost him his life but might give the natives a fighting chance. The decision crystallized when he received an encrypted message on his personal communicator. The sender was listed as Geological Survey Team 7, but Marcus knew there was no Team 7 in the survey department. When he opened the message, he found coordinates for a location deep in the forest beyond Lake Serenity, along with a timestamp for that evening. Marcus arrived at the coordinates as the twin moons reached their zenith. He found himself in a natural clearing, surrounded by towering native trees whose bioluminescent bark cast everything in soft, shifting patterns of blue and green light. He wasn't alone. The clearing contained representatives of at least 6 different native species, all of them watching him with expressions of wary hope. The Zalathi he'd rescued stood at the center of the group, its biotechnological collar glowing softly in the moonlight. But it was no longer alone in wearing human-derived technology. Every creature in the clearing bore some form of technological integration. A tall, mantis-like being had delicate fiber optic networks running along its limbs. A group of small fox-like creatures shared a distributed computing array that networked their individual collar devices. Even the trees themselves seemed to be part of the technological web, with organic cables running between their trunks and connecting to the various species' equipment. Marcus realized he was looking at the native resistance network in person. These beings had transformed themselves, incorporating human technology not to become more like humans, but to become more than what they had been individually. They had achieved a level of biological and technological integration that surpassed anything in human science. The Zalathi approached Marcus and activated a new device, this one clearly designed for interspecies communication. When it spoke, Marcus heard its voice translated into accented but understandable English. "Marcus Chen of humanity," the translated voice said, "we thank you for your choice to learn truth. We thank you for your choice to come here. Now we ask, will you choose to stand with us against the death your species brings?" Marcus looked around the clearing at the assembled beings. Their diversity was stunning. Some were clearly aquatic, like the Zalathi. Others were built for arboreal life, and still others showed adaptations for underground environments. But they all shared that unmistakable spark of intelligence and, more importantly, a desperate determination to survive. "I'll stand with you," Marcus said without hesitation. "But I need to understand what you're planning. The data you showed me proves what's happening. But stopping tabula rasa will require more than documentation. The people responsible have resources and authority I can't match alone." The mantis-like being stepped forward, its translator producing a voice like wind chimes. "We do not plan to match human authority. We plan to make authority irrelevant." The fox-like creatures chittered among themselves, their networked translator producing a harmonious chorus of voices. "Human technology depends on systems. Systems depend on networks. Networks have vulnerabilities that humans do not understand." Marcus began to grasp the scope of what they were planning. The native species had spent months infiltrating and understanding the technological infrastructure of the human colony. Their biological integration with captured human technology wasn't just adaptation. It was preparation for a comprehensive cyber-biological assault on tabula rasa's command and control systems. The Zalathi manipulated its collar device, causing a holographic display to appear above the clearing. This one showed the entire tabula rasa network in real time, with data flows and command structures mapped in intricate detail. Marcus could see that the natives had identified critical vulnerabilities in the system's architecture. "We can disable the poison makers," the Zalathi explained through its translator. "We can corrupt the data flows that guide them. We can make the network forget its purpose, but we cannot reach the command center that directs all activities. This requires human access codes and biological authentication that we cannot replicate." Marcus understood his role in their plan. The central command facility for tabula rasa was located in the administrative district of New Haven, buried beneath the colonial government building. Access required not just security clearance, but biometric identification that only senior colonial officials possessed. "I'm a geological surveyor," Marcus said. "I don't have the access you need." The mantis being made a sound that the translator rendered as gentle laughter. "Marcus Chen, you underestimate human psychology. Humans trust other humans who show courage in crisis. Your rescue of our water friend has been observed by many humans. Your reputation for integrity is known. In crisis, humans will follow those they trust." Marcus felt the weight of their plan settling on him. They weren't asking him to sneak into the command center. They were asking him to lead a human uprising against their own leadership, using his credibility to turn the colonists against the very people who commanded them. The fox-like creatures shared data among themselves, then their translator spoke again. "The poison makers activate fully in 3 days. When they do, The death pattern will accelerate beyond stopping. We must act before then, or all native life ends within 1 season. 3 days. Marcus looked around the clearing at faces filled with desperate hope. These beings had entrusted him with the survival of their entire world, and the clock was ticking toward extinction. "What do you need me to do?" Marcus asked. The Zalathi stepped forward and offered Marcus a new device, this one clearly designed for human use, but incorporating the same biotechnological integration he'd seen in the native equipment. It looked like a standard colonial communicator, but when Marcus touched it, he felt a subtle warmth that suggested living components. "This will allow you to communicate with our network," the Zalathi explained. "Through it, you can coordinate with our actions and access data we have gathered. But more importantly, it will help you show other humans what their leaders have hidden from them." Marcus accepted the device, feeling its weight both physical and symbolic. "How many humans do you think will listen? How many will believe what we show them?" The Mantis being's translator conveyed something that might have been optimism. "Humans are capable of great evil when they follow blindly, but they are also capable of great good when they choose to see clearly. Your species' strength is not in your technology or your authority structures. Your strength is in your ability to change when confronted with moral truth." Over the next hour, the native representatives shared their complete plan with Marcus. It was audacious in its scope and terrifying in its implications. They would simultaneously attack every component of the tabula rasa network while Marcus worked to expose the genocide to the human population. If successful, they could shut down the poisoning operations permanently and force a complete restructuring of human-native relations. If they failed, the native species would face extinction within months, and the human colonists would unknowingly complete the greatest genocide in galactic history. As the meeting concluded, each of the native representatives approached Marcus individually. Some offered technological gifts, devices that would help him in the coming mission. Others made sounds that the translator indicated were blessing or good luck wishes. The fox-like creatures shared a complex harmonic pattern that somehow conveyed the concept of hope transcending species boundaries. Finally, the Zalathi approached for a private farewell. It deactivated its translator and spoke in its own voice, making the same sounds Marcus had heard by the lake during their first encounter. Even without translation, Marcus understood. The creature was thanking him not just for the rescue, but for choosing to see its people as worthy of protection. Marcus reached out and gently touched the creature's head, the same gesture that had sealed their original bond. "I won't let you down," he promised. The natives melted back into the forest, leaving Marcus alone in the clearing with his new biotechnological communicator and the weight of an entire world's future on his shoulders. 3 days to stop a genocide. 3 days to convince an entire human colony to rebel against their own leadership. 3 days to prove that humanity could choose compassion over conquest when confronted with the truth. As Marcus made his way back to New Haven, he began planning his approach. He would start with people he trusted, fellow surveyors who had worked closely with native ecosystems, medical personnel who had noticed unexplained illness patterns, engineers who might have questions about unauthorized installations. The biotechnological device hummed softly against his chest, its living components somehow conveying encouragement. Across the planet, an entire resistance network was preparing for coordinated action, trusting that one human would find a way to reach the conscience of his species. Marcus thought about the Zalathi kit he'd helped rescue, probably safe somewhere with its parent, unaware that its entire future hung in the balance. He thought about the trust in those golden eyes and the faith that intelligence and compassion could triumph over fear and prejudice. 3 days to save a world. It would have to be enough. The next morning, Marcus began making calls. His first contact was Dr. Sarah Kim, the colony's chief medical officer and someone he'd known since the early days of settlement. If anyone would listen to evidence of systematic poisoning, it would be her. When she answered her communicator, her expression was troubled. "Marcus, I was just about to call you. We need to talk. Something's happening to the medical data, and I think someone's been covering up a health crisis." Marcus felt the first spark of hope. The truth, it seemed, was already beginning to surface on its own. "Sarah, clear your schedule. What I'm about to show you will change everything we thought we knew about this colony." The revolution was about to begin.